Since the beginning of its marketing, the Pimax Crystal has touted about interchangeable lenses, and one of them was a 42 ppd pair, which I have in my hands right now. And it's what we're going to be taking a look at today to see if they're actually good or if they were just meant to tick a marketing box. Now, before I get too far into this, I want to bring up the fact these lenses are plastic, not glass like the 35 ppd, when the Crystal's marketing stated numerous times that they were using glass lenses and making a big deal out of it. If you want to see my full rant on that and all the citations in it, you can check out the timestamp on screen right now, my full Pimax Crystal review. I already spent a while ranting about the whole mess concerning the Crystal's lenses, what Pimax promised and then took back, and I don't want to balloon what can otherwise be a short review, restating everything. But in case some people are out of the loop, I want to make this one little fact clear. This is also especially true because originally these were going to be a limited run for pre-orders, or at least that's what I thought they were. But then I'm now being told they're going to have them up for order. So I guess Pimax changed their minds, or maybe they're waiting for tester feedback? I don't know, but I guess I'm going to throw my opinion into the ring just in case. So, let's get to the positives so this review does not start off too depressing. These lenses are supposed to be focused on even higher clarity, having 20% higher PPD than the Crystal's normal lenses. And on that front, it kinda succeeds. When you're looking at high quality assets, such as flat to VR mods, Alex, or heavily modded Skyrim, you can definitely appreciate the extra fidelity provided by the 42 ppd lenses. Even if you aren't looking at high fidelity games though, there is still a benefit in general because you're going to see less aliasing and things are going to appear crisper from the increased pixel density. But the fidelity on VR lenses and displays, it's really getting to the point where it's outpacing what the games themselves were created in mind with. And so I think going too much higher is really hitting diminishing returns territory. This is already kind of a problem with the 35 ppd lenses, it's just more prevalent on the 42 ppd here. Even games like Half-Life Alyx, which is very amazing textures, you can see there are points where the textures clearly cannot keep up with the fidelity of the headset, such as a lot of the roof textures right now. But the clarity comparison to the 35 ppd, it's a little weird for me. See, well, in terms of stuff like aliasing and shimmer, the 42 ppd lenses were definite improvement to me. In terms of like seeing all the little details on the textures and assets, it actually was only a slight bump up from the normal lenses. And if I use something like Alma Lens or CAS, the 35 ppd actually looked kinda close in raw sharpness to the 42 ppd ones. Tried CAS on the 42 ppd ones, and I don't know if it's because the normal ones are just optically better, more time was spent on the distortion profile, or what, but it wasn't quite as big an improvement as with the aliasing. So it's a kind of weird thing for me where the aliasing and shimmer was a little more noticeably improved, but the fine details, it wasn't really the improvement I was expecting, even on super high-res assets. This felt somewhat reflected in my test HMD results when doing the reading test. From 5 meters away, the second to last line on the 35 ppd wasn't that hard to make out. With the last line, I could maybe make out a few individual letters if I squinted, but they were definitely a little bit blurry. On the 42 ppd lenses, the bottom line was about as legible as the second to last line was on the 35 ppd lenses. Slightly less. Not exactly sharp, but enough I could probably identify each letter a little bit more confidently. And the description from the website said these were designed for stuff like movie watching, so I also did load up some 4K videos I recorded or acquired through only the most legal means, but my feelings were pretty similar here. Granted, I'm also not much of a VR media watcher, and I prefer to watch things on my HDR 1000 monitor. But there was another reason I didn't like it for watching videos, and I'm gonna cover in the FOV section. Edge-to-edge clarity on these was fairly good. Most of the lenses with clear only had very minimal image degradation, kind of like the 35 ppd lenses. But considering the FOV is far smaller, it really should be good on the edge-to-edge clarity, since otherwise it'd feel even more claustrophobic. Chromatic aberration was also better controlled at the peripheral versus the 35 ppd lenses. There was maybe some present if I squinted, but even that wasn't as bad as the normal lenses could get. So the image consistency all around is actually quite nice. But there's also one more brief positive to touch on, depending on how you want to look at it, I guess. And that is the performance. So, the default render resolution of the 42 ppd lenses is 3704 by 4100 per eye. That's much lower than the 35 ppd's 4312 by 5100 per eye. That's a difference of around plus 44% pixels per eye on the 35 ppd. This translates to better performance, as I did some brief testing. Here's a benchmark from RE8 where I ran at max settings, save ray tracing and screen space reflections with the DLSS quality on the upscaler branch. And the 42 ppd performed about 38% better on average FPS, which makes sense given the pixel count difference. Now, for anyone wondering why the pixel density on these lenses is higher than the other ones, despite the large difference in rendered resolution, it's because the 42 ppd lenses have a significantly smaller FOV and focus that image into a smaller view. Thus, you can achieve higher clarity despite the lower res due to how area works. I did go up to 150% res, which is about the same rendered resolution as the 35 ppd, and I wasn't all that much more impressed. It was a slight improvement, sure, but nothing amazing. And that is the perfect point for me to talk about the negatives of this thing. And that is literally everything else. Firstly, the field of view on this is just garbage. Here's the rendered field of view, and God, just look at that. 84.68 horizontal and 81 vertical. And that overlap is just hideously bad. It's the worst overlap I have seen on any headset, and it shows in the visual experience. And just to back up the rendered numbers, here are my results with WinFOV using the 42 ppd and the 35 ppd. I got 20 degrees less on both horizontal and vertical. It is the smallest field of view I have used out of any headset, and I hate it. It may look sharp, but it's like looking through a peephole on a door. I don't feel like I'm in the world so much as looking into it from afar because of how limited my vision feels. The issue is then compounded by the lack of stereo overlap. Let me switch the view a bit so you can understand. The red part is what your left eye sees. The blue part is what your right eye sees. Then there's that middle section where they overlap, which is what both see. I'm going to be measuring the overlap horizontally, as it is the most straightforward measurement given how the lens design works. Vertically is basically complete, while diagonal varies a little bit depending on the axis. So we get horizontal overlap by adding the two values both eyes sees. In this case, the 42 ppd, it's 33 plus 33, because 33 degrees to the left and the right is where our stereo vision stops horizontally. So we get 66 degrees of overlap. On the 35 ppd, it is 86. So we lost 20 degrees of FOV on both axis and stereo overlap. And this makes looking at things just unpleasant. Because on top of the smaller FOV, it feels like there's a gap between my vision. It feels less like I'm looking at a complete single picture and more like two slightly overlapping images. Kind of like this. Stereo vision is a big part of how we determine depth and view things in a 3D kind of way. Though it's not the only one. But everything outside your stereo overlap is not benefiting from that. If you're unsure on how exactly this works and looks, right now just cover one of your eyes and look around a bit. You might notice that certain parts of the world appear slightly flatter or a little bit more difficult to accurately judge the distance of. When you're looking outside your stereo overlap, this is effectively what's going on because you only have that one eye to look at the image. As I said, it's not the only way that our eyes gauge depth, and the visual system is excellent at using heuristics to fill in some blanks, but damn, it's important in VR and trying to look around for what little I could without needing to turn my head. The world just kind of felt flatter compared to the 35 ppd lenses. And this, I would assume this is probably part of why. And you remember when I said I didn't like watching videos on this? It's because of the stereo overlap. Looking at, well, almost anything, it just gave me horrible eye strain I didn't get with the normal lenses. It doesn't matter how sharp the image is if it is not pleasant to look at. But things get worse for these lenses, as not only was the visual experience in everything but raw sharpness pretty terrible, these don't support eye tracking. That alone is killer for me. If you're going to use a big headset like the Crystal, and this thing is big by current standards, you may as well get a bunch of features which justify the size. And the eye tracking helps hugely with that. I'm big on eye tracking in VR. Half my recent videos have been about it and all the cool stuff you can do. So to not have it feels like you're removing one of the Crystal's best features, and what has the size somewhat makes sense. You don't get dynamic foveated rendering, especially not with quad views. You don't get it for social VR. And for what? Ping cushion FOV? That's lower than what most people get on a Quest 2? The lowest stereo overlap in the industry? Sharpness, which is only slightly better than the default lenses, and a lot of games don't fully take advantage of anyway? I do not like these lenses. I think the standard lenses for the Crystal are pretty great, and even the wide FOV ones, despite those having some sacrifices and clearly is not going to make them for everyone, I can see a niche for. But these, I'm sure somebody out there would like these, but I think that's going to be a very tiny minority. This has been the least immersive visual experience I've had in VR in a long time. Even if it had eye tracking, I'd still hate these lenses. If the stereo overlap was at least good or decent, then maybe there'd be something here and I could see a niche for media viewing. But right now, there's not a single thing I would rather use these for over the 35 PPD ones. Not even stuff like desktop work in VR, such as reading my scripts while I'm recording the videos like this, because the visual experience is just all around not pleasant. And that's also not all. There were some weird things with these concerning my IPD. I spent hours tinkering on the IPD for this thing. I used a similar IPD that worked on every other headset, including the Crystal's other lenses. I got horrible warping and distortions when moving my head, but when I maxed out the IPD at 72 millimeters, the warping and distortions when moving my head were gone and things felt right. That was the only way which I could make these lenses even usable for me. I asked Pimax about this, and they said it's not supposed to be like that, so I have no idea what the cause is. And it's definitely also not responsible for why I said things felt flat, because I did a lot of experimenting at my right IPD and then the 72, and aside from the warping and the like, it felt the same. But I just can't recommend these lenses. I feel like we're definitely at the point of diminishing returns on raw pixel density in VR when it comes to gaming, at least. Unless we make some kind of huge generational leap. Things like the Crystal and the Arrow reaching 35 PPD, that was a jump of around 50% or more compared to a lot of headsets sitting in the 20s for pixel density. And that was also when things like screen door effect were still kind of very visible. But we're largely past that now. And this isn't the highest relative jump. It's not even half that. It also comes at sacrificing so many other things, it's just not worth it to me. Normally, I would include a link in the description just in case someone wants to buy it, because I don't like it, maybe someone else would. But Pimax doesn't even have these on their websites at the time of this writing, so I have no link for it. Anyway, yeah, there's the video. If you enjoyed my angry ranting, consider sticking around to see what I do next. If not, thanks for making it to the end, and maybe I'll see you again sometime. Later.